إن الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. أما بعد. Indeed, brothers and sisters, we begin by praising Allah. All thanks and praise belong to God in any circumstance. I bear witness that there is none worthy of worship except Allah, and that Muhammad, the son of Abdullah, who was born on the Arabian Peninsula in the city of Mecca, is the last prophet and messenger sent by Allah for the guidance of humanity, for the guidance of the jinn, and as a rahmah, as a mercy and a compassion from Allah, from Ar-Rahman, from the most merciful, to all of His creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَى مُوسَى وَأَخِيهِ أَن تَبَوَّعَ لِقَوْمِكُمَّ بِمِصْرَ بَيُوتٍ وَأَجَلَّ بَيُوتَكُمْ قِبْلَةً وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَبَشِّرِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here is speaking to Musa and his brother. He's speaking to Moses and Aaron. And He's speaking to them at a time, this is in Surah Yunus, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking about a time after the Bani Israel, after the confrontation between Musa and some of the magicians at court. And this is a time when persecution of Bani Israel was rife in the land. And the Bani Israel was still in Egypt, but the Fir'aun was persecuting them greatly. And because of the fear that they had, and because of the actions of Fir'aun, they could not go out and worship openly. They could not go out and gather in public. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says here in the Quran, we revealed to Musa and his brother that they should make homes for your people in Egypt, and make these homes qiblatan, place them in the direction of the qibla, place them in the direction of prayer, and establish salah wa bashir al-mu'mineen. So I wanted to reflect upon this ayah in light of the situation that we find ourselves in. And even though it is very different in many ways from that situation for most of us, but it is also may have some similarities and some guidance for us. We see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts by saying, وَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَى مُوسَى وَأَخِيهِ. I love, one of the things I love in any type of literature, drama, stories, non-fiction even, biographies, is discussions of the relationships among people. Relationships of family members, relationships of close friends, and especially how those relationships change over time, and how those relationships change during times of struggle and hardship. That those relationships can become much closer, or those relationships can also break apart during those times. And this is brought to my attention by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaking to Moses and his brother Aaron. We know Moses and his brother Aaron had a very interesting relationship. Two people from the same family who had very different life experiences, very different talents and skills, but who had such a strong bond that Musa wanted Aaron with him when he had to take on a task. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala assigned both of them to have different tasks in leading Bani Israel during this period. And it just made me think and reflect upon all of the relationships that we have in our own lives, those relationships which may become stronger as a result of this, the people and their families that we may spend a lot more time together with, but also the relationships that are going to be tested and tried from not having the normal contact that we have, and just from being in such a weird time with each other. And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless all those relationships and to make them strong, and to make them of those which improve and become more clear as a result even of hardship and even of trial and tribulation that we are going through. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, make homes for your people in Egypt, and make these homes qiblatan. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, yes, find places for you to stay in Egypt while you're awaiting this hardship. Find places, establish your homes where you can stay, and make them qiblatan, face them towards the qibla, because you can no longer have your temples or your places of prayer where you can gather and you can worship God, but you can have those people who believe, you can have a way to set your homes in the direction of the qibla. And this is the direction of prayer and the direction of facing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wherever we turn our face, we find Allah. And we know for the believers, one of the blessings that we have from the Ummah Muhammad is that all of the masjid, all of the earth, al-ard kulaha, is made a masjid, a place for prayer. So although our heart aches to be away from the sacred places of the masajid, the places that are the most beloved to God on this earth, that they can be closed and that we can be away from them, but yet still we are grateful to Allah that anywhere we are, anywhere we find ourselves, we can worship Allah. And we should set our houses qiblatan. We should keep in mind, as we say, keep our eyes on the prize. Keep a vision of what's important. Keep perspective of where we're heading towards. Do not lose hope, or do not lose sense of purpose, because the most important thing you need in any situation is a sense of purpose. And a sense of purpose and a sense of mission can make even the most difficult situation bearable, and it can make even the most easy situation not worthwhile. If you have no point of what you're doing, even in ease, you will not find benefit. So we have two lessons that we're learning here: is the importance of companionship and the importance of a sense of purpose and mission. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ, establish the regular prayer, establish it. So even though you cannot have the temples, even though you cannot have your regular place of worship, establish the regular prayer. And this points to many benefits for us. This points to the benefit of establishing routine in our lives, of during this time keeping a routine going, setting aside time to worship of Allah. It also sets aside the importance that salah has in our lives, and that even if we cannot do what the ideal is, what we would like to do, that we do whatever we can do. The inability beyond our control not to do the optimum does not prevent us from doing whatever we can do. And that's a lesson that we should take throughout the situation in our ibadah of Allah and in all other situations. And we know that this remembrance of Allah, this is not, we often think of it as just an obligation upon us, something that we owe to someone. But we know Allah prescribed it because of the benefit it has on us, because of the benefit it has for our hearts, for the benefit it has for our mental health, that remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at regular intervals as best we can. And if we're in a situation where we cannot pray, if we're in a situation during that time where we can't pray, then we can set aside a regular other types of remembrance of Allah, whether it's listening to a lecture, whether it's looking at other Islamic educational things, that we can focus on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for a set time every day. And one of the experiments that I've found over this past week is that there were a couple of days where, for whatever reason, I got caught up in other things and other obligations, and I did not have as much chance to spend, even though it seems odd with all the time we have. I still had a couple days where I did not find much time to read the Quran, and then other days where I did find more time to read the Quran. And looking back on those days, I find for sure that my mental health and my state of well-being was better on those days when I read the Quran, even if it was just for 15 minutes, or 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes in the evening. If you set aside that time and stay connected to Allah in whatever way you can, I promise you that you will feel better. And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَلَا بِذِكْرَ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبُ, that truly it is in the remembrance of God that the hearts find rest. But finally, the last thing, and perhaps one of the most important things I want to focus on from this ayah, is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala finishes in speaking to Musa alayhi salam. He says, وَبَشِّرِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. وَبَشِّرِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. And we know this idea of bushra. We know the Prophet ﷺ was a bashira wa nadira. He was a giver of glad tidings and also a warner. We know that this idea of giving bushra, giving glad tidings or good news to people, is a fundamentally prophetic trait. But I liked one of the commentators. He had a beautiful way of describing this, because some of them may seem beautiful, but they may also seem trite when we talk about good news or glad tidings. They may not hit us in the heart. But the commentator, he said, what does it mean to bashir al-mu'mineen? What does it mean to give this bushra to the people of iman, to the believers, to the people of faith? It says, he described it as, fill them with hope and courage, by giving them the good news of success by the grace of God. And then the commentator adds, and the Bani Israel at this time, they truly needed that very badly, for they were full of despair, fear, and depression. So I hope none of us are in that state, but I know some of us may have moments where we are in that state, may have times where we're in that state, that this is a very difficult time. So the prophetic task and the task of those people who are reminding others is to be a bashira, to be a person that fills people with hope and courage by giving the good news of success by the grace of God. And the analogy that I drew in one of my notes was to the situation that we often have when we come into the month of Ramadan. Many times when we're getting ready for the month of Ramadan, I know, for example, I'll take myself last year, getting ready for the month of Ramadan, we find that fasting outside of Ramadan is often very difficult, that we often can't make through the whole day, that you don't have that community support and you don't have the barakah of Ramadan, and sometimes you're not able to do it. And you may have other physical things where you're not at your best. And you begin to be scared, how can I go through a whole month? And if you tell someone who's not Muslim about the process of Ramadan, they will feel like, I can't do it. What do you mean a whole month, even during the summer, the long days, no eating, no drinking, and coming together at night to have long prayers and keep up all my other work and all my other obligations? There's no way I can do it. And we begin to feel this anxiety and this worry because we are focused on the long time. We're playing out all these scenarios. What happens if I get sick? What happens if I get weak? What happens if I can't do this or that? But instead, if we take it one day at a time, we all have had the experience that you settle into a new routine, that you adapt to something, and that, of course, if something comes up, if you are sick, you break your fast, it's not a problem. But we find more often than we think, we are able to do things that we would have thought impossible. And it's the goodness of the community and the encouragement of community, and it's the blessings of God that make what we thought was impossible, possible. And we pray that that will be the same with this situation, that we will not look ahead and play out scenarios and endlessly, without benefit, think of what could happen or could happen or could happen, but instead we will go forward, we will get the information that we need to protect ourselves, to protect other people, to do the best we can to mitigate the harm of this situation, and then we will focus on what we can do that day. And we will not just focus on this situation, but we will continue to live our lives. We will continue to worship Allah. We will continue to form our relationships. We will take as a great blessing if we have school or work that we continue to focus on. And pretty soon, inshallah ta'ala, the time will pass and we will get through this. And we will get through it together, and we will through it by the grace of God. One of the things that we often have to remind ourselves is that God has not lost control of this thing. God is fully in control at all times, and in that we place our trust and reliance on Allah. We rely on ourselves for the actions we have to do, and we leave the things that are beyond our control, the results and the things that are controlled beyond us, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is indeed a gift from Allah, as others speak about, that we are now about a week in for many of us, a week into this situation where we're in a new time, a new frame, a new routine. We're still getting used to it, but we've started to see some patterns and we've started to see how we will feel during this time. And many, as others notice, that as it happens during Ramadan, as happens during other time when you're in a new situation, you begin to your emotions become more raw. They become closer to the surface. You begin to learn more about yourself. And sometimes learning more about ourselves is not always comfortable, but it's always good. It's always good to be honest with ourselves and to learn about how we feel and our emotions, but then not to become controlled by that, but to take a message from that God is sending a message from us about what makes us comfortable and what doesn't make us comfortable. And indeed, too often, we take things of this world and we try to ignore how we're feeling or try to ignore the messages that our emotions are trying to send us. So we may have in the past tried to just dull our senses with activities that we can't engage in anymore. We may have been tried to run away from situations that we don't like by going somewhere else, and we may not have those options anymore. So we may have to face up to different situations. And we ask Allah to protect especially the vulnerable people who are in difficult situations. And we ask us to seek out opportunities that we can help those people. And for those of us who are in situations which are not abusive or not dangerous, but are just situations that still can be difficult for us, we ask Allah to help us to manage those situations, to help us to learn lessons from this situation that will benefit us as we go forward. One of the great lessons of Ramadan is that you become more grateful for the things you took for granted. The food that you eat, the water that you drink, it becomes much more appreciated. You have that sweetness when you break your fast. You start to realize things that you wouldn't have thought twice of before, you start to really appreciate. So we hope that this situation has already made us appreciate some of the things that we may have taken for granted before. I know one brother was reflecting that we often start off the khutbah and Jummah by talking about being thankful to God that He allowed us to come together for Jummah. Even though we think of it as an obligation or something that we have to do, we remind ourselves that we should be grateful to God to be able to do it. But it doesn't hit anywhere near as hard. Even though those times I believe we were sincerely grateful, but it didn't hit as hard as it does now when we have that taken away from us and when we really realize the blessing that we had at that time. So we've started to understand the blessings that we had, the blessings of community, the blessings of being able to go and eat with someone in a restaurant, the blessings of being able to go and gather with people and have community gatherings of many, many people. And these things have all been taken away from us hopefully we hope is just a time, and this makes us appreciate them more. But we should also not lose sight of being appreciative for all the things that we do have. For all the, if we have food, if we have water, if we have a safe place to stay, if we have ways to maintain connections with others, if we have ways to get information, if we have books in our home, whatever we may have, we should be grateful for that. We should be grateful for the things that we have, and we should be grateful for the things that we're missing. And we should be all in all just cultivate an attitude of focusing on all those things we are grateful for and not just focusing on the things that we don't have. Indeed, and we'll end with this reminder, indeed, this is what Shaitan wants you to do. Shaitan always wants you to ignore the blessings that you have and focus on what you wish you had. Shaitan always wants you to spend all day scrolling internet for news and worries and things that you can have no control over, and get yourself in a situation where you become panicked or despairing or any of those things. This is what Shaitan wants you to do, because this promotes this attitude of feeling overwhelmed and wanting to give up. But if we run away from that, if we focus on gratitude, if we focus on doing what's ahead of us, if we focus on the tasks that we have, if we focus on coming to the aid of others, if we focus on what we need in this time period, then inshallah ta'ala, we will begin to see how resilient we are and how adaptive we are. And some of the greatest inspirations that I have taken during times of hardship in my life have always been from people who have experienced a lot of hardship. People who have experienced more hardship than I, and people who are incredibly resilient. And they always give me such beautiful spiritual advice. And as I shared in one of my previous messages, what comes to mind in this situation is when I was at one time earlier in this year, when I was becoming a little just frustrated with the day-to-day things and feeling tired and feeling like there were things beyond my control. And just in passing, I said, I give up. And the person turned to me and she said, giving up is not allowed in Ummah. Giving up is not allowed in Ummah. Now, this is something that could seem just like a cliche or a joke, or this is something that could even seem insensitive. If you say that to someone in a situation of real need and pain and sorrow, you could think that you're trying to deny what they're going through. But I knew when this person said that they weren't trying to deny any of those things, that they knew much more than me what it feels like to be overwhelmed, that they knew much more than me what it feels like to not know what the future holds and not know what direction to take. But the lesson that they had learned and the inspiration that they had taken and that they could share with others was to just remind yourself that giving up is not allowed in Ummah, that giving up is not an option that we have. So if you're feeling that way, as we said, turn to the remembrance of Allah, turn to some kind of healthy activity, turn to some kind of exercise, turn to each other, Turn to me, establish appointments with me. We will check in. We will continue to move forward, but do not give up. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised all of us, فَإِنَّمَا الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا إِنَّمَا الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. Wherever there is hardship, there is relief and ease. Wherever there is hardship, there is relief and ease. I want to thank you all for listening to this message. We're trying this out. I hope that it comes across okay technically and everything else. And we will continue to move forward in the future, sharing additional messages. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hold us all close. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, may we be faithful to Allah, and we know that Allah al-Mu'min will be faithful to us. May Allah heal all those who are sick or who may get sick. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all those who are treating people, all those who are providing food for people, all those who are making this the society keep going during this extreme case. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us to be of those people who continue to bring Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's blessings, to channel Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's blessings to His creation. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Jazakum Allahu khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.